When the snow began to fall that night, it did not fall like a blessing. It came like a memory that refused to die, soft at first, then relentless, burying everything the boy once knew beneath a white silence. Houses disappeared. Roads vanished. Even the stars seemed to hide behind the storm. Somewhere in that endless white, a small refugee child walked alone, his breath-forming ghosts that vanished before his eyes. The world had turned into a whisper of ice and wind. His shoes were soaked, his fingers stiff, but he kept walking, because to stop was to disappear too. He had no map, no name painted on a tag, only the echo of his mother's last words. "If you keep moving, my son, God will find you." The snow lashed his face like 1,000 small cuts. Each step felt heavier than the one before, yet he moved with the strange determination of those who have lost everything and have nothing left to fear. Around him, the mountains moaned under the weight of the storm. The sky was a swirling gray sea, the wind howling like a beast that had forgotten mercy. The boy pressed his thin coat tighter and whispered a prayer into the dark, not sure if anyone could still hear prayers out here. The storm grew louder, swallowing every sound except the crunch of his boots. Once he thought he saw lights in the distance. Warm, flickering lights, but when he blinked they were gone. Only the snow remained, endless and indifferent. He tried to remember the warmth of fire, the smell of bread baking, the sound of his mother's voice humming as she mended his shirt. But memory was a fragile thing in the cold. It froze easily, then shattered. Still, he kept going. He didn't know why. Perhaps because a voice inside him whispered that someone, somewhere, was waiting for him. Someone who still believed in the small spark of goodness that refuses to die, even in a world buried in snow. So he walked. He walked until his legs trembled, until the storm became the only sound in existence. And when his strength finally gave out, he fell to his knees in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by nothing but white. The wind howled again, colder now, sharper, almost alive. And from within it, beneath the roar of the blizzard, came another sound. A cry. Faint, desperate. Not human. He lifted his head. Somewhere out there, something else was fighting the storm too. The boy stood, staggering, eyes wide, heart pounding in his chest. He listened again, and the cry came once more. Softer now, but unmistakable. It was a whimper. A puppy's cry. And though the storm threatened to swallow him whole, he turned toward the sound. The world around him was no longer a place. It was an endless breath of snow and silence. The mountains had vanished beneath a shroud of white, and even the trees stood like frozen sentinels, their branches heavy with sorrow. The wind whispered through the hollows, carrying the smell of pine and smoke from fires long extinguished. The boy's small figure moved through that pale wilderness, a shadow of warmth against an unforgiving sky. His scarf, little more than a torn strip of cloth, clung to his neck like a memory refusing to let go. He followed the faint cry he had heard, the one sound that seemed alive in a world otherwise asleep. With every step, the snow deepened. It rose to his knees, then his thighs, clutching at his legs like hands trying to pull him down. His breath came out ragged, visible in short bursts, floating away before it could reach heaven. He paused by the remains of a wooden fence, half buried under snow. Beyond it stood the ghost of a village. Collapsed roofs, windows shattered, doors hanging open like mouths that once called for help but never received an answer. He had passed through many ruins before, but this place felt different. The silence here was heavy, almost sacred, as if something had been waiting all this time to be found. The cry came again, closer now, more desperate. The boy's heart quickened. He stumbled forward, brushing snow aside with trembling hands. Between two fallen beams, under a layer of frost and broken tiles, he saw movement, a small, trembling bundle of fur, half buried in white. It was a puppy. Its tiny body shook, breath shallow, one paw caught beneath the debris. Its fur, once golden, was gray with ice. The boy dropped to his knees beside it, brushing away the snow with numb fingers. "Hey, little one," he whispered, his voice breaking through the wind. "Don't give up." The puppy whimpered again, a faint sound, but alive. The boy bit his lip. His hands burned from the cold as he tried to free the creature. The wood was heavy, the snow thickening, his fingers stiffening, But he didn't stop. There was something sacred in the smallness of that life, something that reminded him of his own. Finally, the puppy came free, collapsing into his arms, a small beating heart against his chest. The boy cradled it close, letting his body's faint warmth seep into its fur. The wind roared again, carrying snow across the ruins like a ghostly tide. The boy looked around. No shelter, no smoke, nothing but the skeletons of houses and the storm above. He knew they would both die out here if he didn't move. Clutching the puppy inside his coat, he rose and stumbled onward, his boots sinking deep into the drifts. Each step was a prayer without words. Please, let there be warmth somewhere. Behind him, the wind erased his footprints. Before him, the world stretched on, silent and white, as if testing how far one small heart could go. The storm had softened a little, though the wind still whispered through the broken homes like a morning song. The boy walked slowly now, the small puppy pressed to his chest beneath his coat. Its fur was damp, its body trembling, yet the faint rhythm of its heartbeat gave him courage. He had not heard another heartbeat close to his own in many days. The world after the war had become quiet. Too quiet. He remembered when there had been laughter in the village, when smoke rose from the chimneys and bread filled the air with warmth. Now there was only ash, silence, and snow. He did not know how many nights had passed since he had last seen another human face. Hunger had become a companion, one that gnawed softly but never left. Sometimes he imagined he could still hear his mother's voice, humming a lullaby over the sound of rain. The memory always began the same way, her hand brushing his hair, her eyes tired but kind, whispering, "Where there's light, there's God, my son. And where there's God, there's hope." He tried to keep that sentence alive inside him, repeating it like a prayer as his feet broke through the frozen crust of snow. The puppy stirred faintly, letting out a small cry. The boy smiled weakly. "Sure," he said, "you'll scare the wind." He felt foolish speaking to an animal, yet it was the first voice he had heard answer him, even in whimpers, for what felt like forever. He tore a small piece of stale bread from his pocket, the last crumb of what had once been his mother's loaf, and pressed it near the puppy's mouth. The little creature licked it weakly, eyes half closed, tail flicking once beneath the coat. "You're just like me," the boy murmured. "Hungry, lost, but still alive." He looked up at the pale horizon. The snow had stopped falling for a moment, and the clouds had opened just enough for him to see a single shaft of light touch the far side of the mountain. It glowed faintly, like a candle left burning for travelers who had lost their way. The boy took it as a sign. He pressed on toward that light, each step leaving behind a faint trail that the wind hurried to erase. His body ached, but his heart was steadier now. The warmth of the puppy against his chest reminded him that something fragile and good still depended on him. Sometimes he spoke softly to the creature as they walked. "Do you think she's watching me from up there?" "My mother." The puppy only sighed, curling closer to the boy's warmth. As the hours passed, the light faded again, and the cold returned like a shadow. But the boy no longer felt completely alone. Something within him, small, flickering but real, began to thaw. When the storm howled again, it no longer sounded like a beast. It sounded like the world breathing. He pulled his coat tighter, whispered another prayer, and kept moving toward the unknown. Somewhere ahead, beyond the white horizon, there had to be a place where warmth still lived. And tonight, for the first time in many nights, he truly believed he might find it. If this story touches your soul, please subscribe and help us reach 1,000 hearts who still believe that compassion can survive any storm. Tell us where you're listening from. Your words keep this fire alive. The wind rose again before nightfall, sharp and angry, slicing through the quiet like broken glass. The world turned white once more, swallowing the faint footprints that trailed behind the boy. He tightened his coat around the small puppy, whose breath came in short, frightened gasps. Each gust of wind pushed against him, a wall of ice that tried to send him backward. But he leaned forward, one step at a time, eyes half closed against the blizzard. "Hold on," he whispered, though he wasn't sure if he was speaking to the puppy or to himself. Snow clung to his lashes. The cold bit into his fingers until he could no longer feel them. His feet were blocks of ice inside his worn shoes. Still he moved, because stopping meant the snow would claim them both. He tried to think of warmth, of the firelight from his mother's hearth, of the smell of wood smoke that once drifted through their home in winter. But memory could not melt snow, and faith could not warm frozen skin. The puppy stirred, whimpering. Its body was growing colder, its breathing shallow. The boy pressed it closer to his chest, pulling his thin coat tight around both of them. The little creature's head rested beneath his chin, so light, so fragile, yet somehow the only thing keeping him from falling apart. He spotted something through the snow, a faint shape in the distance. A structure, maybe. A barn, a house, a dream. It was impossible to tell. But he had to try. He stumbled forward, knees sinking into deep drifts. The puppy let out a soft cry as he fell once, then twice. On the third fall, he stayed down. The snow was soft there. Quiet, inviting. A terrible peace. He could sleep, he thought. Just for a moment. Let the storm pass. Then the puppy whimpered again, a sound so weak it barely rose above the wind, yet it cut through him sharper than any blade. No, he breathed. Not yet. He forced himself up, trembling. His breath came in ragged bursts. Somewhere in that blur of white, the shape of a roof appeared, dark against the storm, faint but real. He could almost smell old wood and soot. But the wind howled harder, pushing him sideways. Snow swirled around them like ghosts. His vision blurred, and the puppy cried out once more, a small plea that felt like a prayer. "I won't leave you," he whispered. His words came out cracked, almost lost to the wind. "You hear me. You and me, we keep walking." He pressed on, one foot dragging before the other, the puppy cradled in his arms like something sacred. The snow rose higher. The wind screamed louder. The world spun. Then, darkness. The boy fell, collapsing beside a half-buried wooden door. The puppy wriggled faintly, pawing at the snow as if urging him to move. Through half-closed eyes, the boy saw it, a handle rusted but real. With the last of his strength, he pulled. The door creaked open with a groan that sounded almost like mercy. Inside there was shadow, stillness, the smell of wood and dust, a shelter. He crawled in, the puppy pressed against his chest, and shut the door behind them just as the storm roared past outside, a beast locked out by inches. The boy slumped against the wall, gasping for air. The darkness was cold, but quieter now. He could hear the faint panting of the puppy beside him. Alive. He smiled weakly, whispering, "We made it." Then he closed his eyes and listened. Not to the storm, not to the wind, but to the fragile sound of another life breathing next to his. And for the first time that night, he believed that maybe, just maybe, they weren't alone in this world anymore. The door shut behind him with a hollow thud, sealing out the scream of the storm. Inside, the darkness was thick, almost alive. The boy could hear only the soft drip of melting snow from the ceiling and the faint, uneven panting of the puppy in his arms. He waited for his eyes to adjust. Slowly, shapes began to emerge from the shadows. Old pews, a broken cross hanging crooked on the far wall, shards of stained glass half buried in dust. This wasn't a house. It was a church, or what was left of one. The boy dragged himself to the corner where a few planks had fallen from the roof. Beneath them, the floor was littered with splinters and dry bark. His trembling fingers fumbled for a match inside his pocket. His last one. He struck it. For a moment there was light. A trembling flame reflected in his eyes, illuminating the fragile bones of the place, the cracked altar, the overturned candle holders, the faded painting of an angel whose face had been burned away. He used that small flame to coax life into a tiny pile of wood. Smoke curled upward, hesitating, then the fire caught. A thin glow spread across the church, gold against the blue cold. The puppy stirred, letting out a small whimper. Its eyes glistened in the firelight, wet and wide, as if unsure whether to trust the warmth. "It's all right," the boy whispered. "We're safe now. For a little while." He took off his coat and wrapped the puppy in it, placing it near the fire. Then he tore his last piece of bread in half. The larger piece he pressed into the puppy's mouth. The smaller one he chewed slowly, letting the taste linger. Dry, old, but still the sweetest thing he had known in weeks. The fire crackled softly. Outside, the storm raged against the walls like a living thing, but inside, there was peace. Fragile, flickering, but real. He stared at the cross on the wall. Its edges were cracked, one arm missing, the face of Christ long faded. Yet somehow it looked almost alive in the light. The boy bowed his head. "Thank you," he whispered, not sure if the words were for God, or for the fire, or for the tiny creature sleeping by his side. The puppy's breathing slowed, steady and calm now. Its chest rose and fell with quiet rhythm, its fur glowing orange in the firelight. The boy reached out and touched it gently. "You're stronger than you look," he murmured. "You didn't give up." He lay beside the fire, his body finally beginning to thaw. The heat stung his skin, but he didn't care. He watched the shadows dance across the broken walls, shapes shifting like memories. His mother's hands kneading bread, her voice humming that same old lullaby. He closed his eyes and listened to the quiet between the flames. It sounded like breathing, like prayer. Outside, the wind screamed. But here, inside the ruins of a forgotten church, two small lives had found each other, and together they made enough warmth to hold back the night. The storm outside raged on through the night. It groaned against the wooden walls of the ruined church, whistling through the cracks, like the voice of a restless world that would not let the boy sleep. He lay near the dying fire, his body heavy with exhaustion, his eyes half open. The flames had burned down to glowing embers, their light soft and tired. The puppy slept beside him, its tiny body curled like a question mark, its breath warm against his hand. The boy's lips were cracked, his fingers raw. The warmth of the fire was fading, and each breath he took came with effort. Still, he smiled faintly. "See," he whispered weakly to the little creature. "We made it through the night." But the puppy did not move. Its ears twitched, then lifted. Its nose quivered, sniffing the air. Then, suddenly, it stood. "What is it?" the boy murmured. The puppy turned toward the door, its small body tense, listening. Outside, beneath the howl of the wind, there was a different sound, distant, low, rhythmic, like footsteps crunching through deep snow. The boy tried to sit up, but his body wouldn't obey. His vision blurred. His chest felt tight, his limbs heavy. The warmth that had saved him was slipping away again, leaving him numb and slow. The puppy barked, a sharp, sudden sound that echoed through the hollow church. Then, without warning, it darted toward the door. "Wait!" the boy tried to call, but his voice came out as a whisper. The small creature squeezed through a gap between the door and the frame, vanishing into the blizzard. The wind rushed in for a moment, a freezing scream that tore through the fire's last light, then silence. The boy was alone. He tried to move, but his strength was gone. His body trembled violently, then went still. He looked toward the cracked cross on the wall, its outline glowing faintly in the darkness. "Please," he whispered to no one, to everything, "don't let him die out there." The snow hissed against the walls. The world narrowed to a dim blur. Firelight, shadow, cold. His thoughts drifted in and out like smoke. He thought of his mother again, of her voice whispering over the sound of rain. "If you keep moving, God will find you." A tear froze on his cheek. He was too tired to wipe it away. Then a sound. Distant at first, then closer. Barking. And another sound with it, a crunching rhythm, heavier this time. Footsteps. Light. A golden beam broke through the cracks in the door, cutting across the church floor like sunrise through darkness. The handle turned. The door creaked open, and snow poured in around the legs of a man holding a lantern. He was tall, wrapped in wool and fur, his beard dusted white. In his arms, shivering and wet, was the little puppy. "Dear Lord," the man breathed, kneeling beside the boy. "A child." The boy blinked up at him, eyes wide and glassy. He came back," he whispered. The man touched his forehead gently. "Hush now. You're safe." The puppy wriggled free and crawled toward the boy, licking his frozen fingers. The shepherd smiled faintly, pulling a thick blanket from his pack. Outside, the storm still howled, but inside, for the first time, the air felt warm. As the man lifted him into his arms, the boy's vision blurred again, but this time with peace. He could still hear the wind, but beneath it came another sound, a soft bell tolling from somewhere far away, slow and gentle like a heartbeat. And just before he drifted into sleep, he felt the puppy's fur against his cheek. The smallest miracle returned from the storm. Sparkles, if this story touches your heart, please subscribe. You are part of our dream, to reach 1,000 souls who still believe that faith can find its way through any storm. When the boy awoke, the world was gold. Sunlight spilled through a windowpane covered in frost, painting soft halos on the wooden walls. The air smelled of smoke and pine, and somewhere nearby, a kettle hissed gently over a small fire. For a long moment, he simply lay there, staring at the beams above, unsure if he was alive or dreaming. Then came the sound, soft, familiar, a tiny bark. He turned his head and saw the puppy at the foot of the bed, wagging its tail weakly, eyes bright in the morning light. Its fur was clean now, dry and golden again. It barked once more, a cheerful sound that broke through the silence like laughter after years of sorrow. The boy smiled, his lips cracking slightly as he whispered, "You came back." A deep voice answered from the doorway. "He led me to you." The shepherd stood there, broad-shouldered, his coat thick with wool, his face weathered by the mountain wind. His lantern now rested beside the door, unlit. In his hands, he carried a bowl of warm broth that steamed faintly in the cold morning air. "You've been sleeping for nearly a day," the man said. "It was a miracle I found you. The storm nearly took the whole valley." The boy tried to sit up, but his limbs trembled. The shepherd helped him gently, wrapping another blanket around his shoulders. "Eat," he said softly, placing the bowl in the boy's hands. Slowly, the boy lifted the spoon, his fingers still weak. The broth was thin but warm, and to him it tasted like life itself. The shepherd sat across from him, hands resting on his knees. "You're not from around here," he said after a pause. The boy shook his head. "There's no around here anymore." The man nodded slowly, as if he understood. He looked toward the puppy, now curled by the fire. That little one wouldn't stop barking. I followed the sound for miles. Smart creature. Brave, too. The boy's eyes softened. "He saved me," he said simply. The shepherd smiled faintly. "Maybe he saved us both." Silence filled the cabin, not the heavy silence of the storm, but a gentler one. Outside, snow melted from the roof in steady drops. The mountains glistened, their edges softened by sunlight. The boy finished his meal and leaned back, his gaze falling on the window. He could see the church in the distance, or what was left of it, half buried in snow, its cross now shining faintly under the morning sun. "Do you think," he asked quietly, "that God still hears prayers from a place like that?" The shepherd followed his gaze. "I think he never stopped listening," he said. "We just stopped believing he's close." The boy lowered his head, his eyes filling with quiet tears. The puppy climbed into his lap, curling against his chest just as it had during the storm. Its warmth spread through him, a pulse of life that felt like a promise. In that small cabin, surrounded by snow and silence, something within the boy began to heal. Not quickly, not entirely, but enough. Enough to breathe again. He looked at the shepherd and whispered, "Thank you." The man smiled. "Thank the one who led me there." He nodded toward the puppy, now fast asleep. The fire crackled. The world outside glowed. And for the first time in a long time, the boy didn't feel like a refugee, he felt found. Days passed gently in the shepherd's cabin. The boy grew stronger. His cheeks regained a touch of color. His hands no longer shook when he held the wooden cup of warm milk each morning. The puppy followed him everywhere now, stumbling clumsily over the floorboards, its little paws clicking like rain on wood. The storm had long passed, but its memory lingered. Sometimes the boy would wake before dawn, still hearing the wind scream through the mountains. But when he reached out and felt the puppy curled against his side, breathing softly, the fear melted away like frost beneath sunlight. He began helping the shepherd with small chores, fetching water from the frozen stream, stacking wood, feeding the goats that bleated softly in the nearby pen. He moved carefully, still thin and pale, but every task brought him closer to the feeling of being alive again. One morning, as the snow glistened under a rising sun, the shepherd said, You have a strong heart, boy. Storms like that can take more than just warmth, they take spirit. But you're still here. The boy smiled faintly. I think. He gave it back to me. He looked down at the puppy, now chewing gently on the frayed edge of his sleeve. The shepherd chuckled. Maybe you both saved each other. The boy thought about that all day. That night, after supper, he sat by the fire while the shepherd hummed an old hymn. Slow, gentle, like a lullaby for the weary. The flames reflected in the boy's eyes, and for the first time, he didn't see destruction there. He saw warmth, motion, life. He thought of the church, of the broken cross, the fading angel, the way the light had touched the snow that morning after the storm. He remembered how he had begged for a sign, how he had whispered for help when no one could hear him. And then he remembered the cry in the storm, the small, trembling sound that had led him toward the puppy. The sound he had followed, even when his body had begged him to stop. Maybe, he thought, rescue doesn't come as thunder from heaven. Maybe it comes as a whisper, a cry so small you could miss it if your heart is closed. He ran his fingers through the puppy's fur. You were the answer, he said softly. And I didn't even know I was praying. The fire crackled, casting soft shadows across the cabin walls. The shepherd looked up from his seat, smiling quietly. There's a truth in that, he said. God doesn't always send angels in shining light. Sometimes, he sends them with muddy paws. The boy laughed, a small, clear sound that filled the cabin with something that had been missing for far too long. Joy. Outside, the wind was gentle now. The snow reflected the moonlight like a field of silver glass. The mountains were still, and for the first time in a long time, so was his heart. He whispered a prayer, not for food or warmth or even home, but for gratitude. For the storm that tested him. For the cry that guided him. For the life that reminded him what it meant to be human again. He looked at the puppy sleeping at his feet, the shepherd resting by the fire, and the light flickering like a heartbeat between them all. Rescue, he thought, isn't just being found. It's finding something to live for once you are. Spring came slowly to the mountains. At first, only the tips of the pines shed their white coats, and small rivers began to murmur beneath the ice. Then, one by one, the first wildflowers appeared. Fragile, trembling, but alive. The boy stood outside the shepherd's cabin, his feet bare against the cold soil. The puppy ran circles around him, chasing its own shadow in the pale light. The world, once silent and cruel, now sang softly with the sound of melting snow. He looked out toward the valley. In the distance, he could still see the ruins of the church, its broken roof glinting under the sun. Yet, in that ruin, he no longer saw loss. He saw the place where his life had been given back to him. The shepherd joined him at the door, resting a heavy hand on his shoulder. You've grown strong, he said. The boy smiled faintly. I think the storm was a teacher. The man nodded. Storms often are. They stood together in silence, watching the clouds drift between the peaks. The air was clean, carrying the scent of pine and thawed earth. Somewhere far above, a bird cried, a sound full of life and freedom. The boy knelt and called softly, Come here, little one. The puppy trotted toward him, tail wagging, eyes bright with devotion. The boy scooped it up and held it against his chest, just as he had that night when the world was nothing but snow and fear. But now there was no desperation in his grip, only love. You saved me, he whispered, and you showed me something I'll never forget. The puppy tilted its head, as if listening. That the smallest light can guide you through the biggest darkness, the boy continued. That no act of kindness is ever lost. And that maybe faith isn't about waiting for miracles. It's about becoming one. He looked up at the sky, where the clouds were slowly parting to reveal a pale, tender blue. The sun shone faintly through them, its warmth soft on his skin. The shepherd smiled, watching the boy and the small golden creature in his arms. The snow melts, he said, but the warmth stays. The boy nodded. He understood now. The storm had not come to destroy him. It had come to remind him that love still walks this earth, sometimes on 2 feet, sometimes on 4 paws. As the wind brushed his hair, carrying the scent of the new season, the boy whispered a final prayer, not for safety or bread, but for gratitude. For the storm. For the stranger. For the smallest heart that refused to give up. And for the quiet truth he would carry with him always, that even in the coldest night, when all seems lost, there is always something waiting to be found. The spring thaw had turned the mountains into rivers of light. The snow melted slowly, revealing forgotten paths and broken fences, places that had waited all winter for the sound of footsteps again. One morning, the boy woke before sunrise. The air was still, and the valley shimmered faintly under a veil of mist. The shepherd was already outside, tending to the goats. The puppy, now stronger, bolder, bounded after him, chasing the echoes of its own joy. The boy watched from the doorway for a moment, smiling. Then, quietly, he picked up the small wooden cross the shepherd had carved for him. Rough, simple, tied with a thin string, and slipped it into his pocket. He walked down the hill, the frost crunching beneath his bare feet. The path wound between pines and streams until he reached what remained of the old church. The walls still leaned, the roof still broken, yet sunlight now poured through the cracks where snow had once fallen. The air smelled of wet wood and new life. Birds had built nests in the rafters, their songs filling the emptiness where silence once lived. The boy stepped inside. The floor creaked softly beneath him. He knelt before the half-buried altar and placed the wooden cross there, just beneath the broken window. "I came back," he whispered. He closed his eyes. The memory of that night rose around him, the storm, the cold, the fear, and that faint cry that had guided him toward life. It felt distant now, like a dream retold in another lifetime. "I thought I was alone," he said softly. "But I wasn't. You were there, in the wind, in the snow, in him." The wind stirred again through the cracks in the wall, brushing his hair like a gentle hand. Somewhere above, a small bell still hung in the steeple, rusted, cracked, but whole enough to move. The breeze carried through it, and the bell rang once. The sound was soft, fragile, and pure. It echoed down the valley, a note of peace carried on the morning air. The boy looked up, tears warming his eyes. The puppy barked in the distance, bounding toward him through the tall grass, sunlight catching in its fur like gold. He laughed, arms open, and the little creature leapt into them. Together they stood in the doorway of the ruined church, surrounded by light. The boy whispered, "The snow melts, but the warmth stays." And somewhere far above, the bell rang again, not loud, but enough to remind the mountains that even the smallest heart can change the sound of the world.